Good morning, everyone. Good morning to all participants. Welcome to the OECS webinar series. And today's webinar is on the topic, the OECS Biodiversity and Ecosystems Framework and Strategic Action Plan. I would just like to start by again saying good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on which part of the world that you are in. And happy Earth Day. It's our 50th anniversary, and the theme, as most of you all may know, is climate action. So this is an opportunity for us to greet Mother Earth. And although we don't have a prayer, I would just like to direct you all to Psalm 65 and verse 9, actually. And it relates to the earth. So the theme is so it relates to the earth. So for our webinar, I will just give you the outline, a brief outline. On the agenda for today. So we will be having our introductory remarks, and I'm your host, Joan John Norville. We also have remarks from the two agencies who are collaborating on presenting this webinar, Canary and OECS. The presentation by Dr. Natalie Boudreau, and then a panel discussion where we will have, that's after the presentation, be moderated by Cornelius Isaac, and we will have our panelists or experts, coastal and marine biodiversity, terrestrial and environment in general. Okay, so just waiting for a couple of other persons to come on. Okay. And just to remind persons, there is a question and answer session and a chat box. So if you have any comments or any questions, you can put it in your icon, you'll see the question and answer icon at the bottom of the screen next to the chat. So you will be able to put it in. Okay. I would now invite Mr. Chamberlain Emmanuel, who is the head of the Environmental Sustainability Cluster, to deliver remarks on behalf of the OECS.
Thanks, Joan, and good day to everyone, and happy Earth Day to all. And just want to add my voice again to welcome all our colleagues, partner agencies, and friends who have taken the time to join us on this conversation this morning. The Caribbean islands have been identified as one of the world's top biodiversity hotspots, a hotspot being an area characterized by both a high level of regionally unique species and a severe degree of habitat loss and vulnerability to extinctions. Unfortunately, conservation and sustainable management of biodiversity in these islands, including in the Eastern Caribbean, is often hampered by competing goals of economic growth and national development, which are often perceived as being at odds with environmental protection and preservation. Additionally, these islands also face a range of institutional challenges, including a lack of awareness of the values of biodiversity, weak environmental legislation, shifting jurisdiction of environmental portfolios, overlap and or gaps in jurisdiction, limited technical information, inadequate human and technical capacity, and insufficient funding for biodiversity. Having said all of that, the OECS Commission believes that our partnership with Canary in articulating what will be the foundation for our discussion this morning, the biodiversity and ecosystems strategy and the accompanying action plan, really sets a platform for an excellent dialogue to see how we can bridge those gaps and to ensure that we continue to have healthy ecosystems. Let me just say as I conclude that the experience we've had recently with the managing of COVID-19 has, even in our island spaces, has demonstrated the extreme value of our biodiversity. We have situations where we have the leveraging of local and indigenous knowledge, leveraging of our natural plants and other resources, whether it be for hand sanitizers, for home medicines, and also to ensure that our people have livelihoods that can keep them occupied in this time. So just a demonstration of how valuable our biodiversity and ecosystems are. And I trust that as we carry on in this dialogue today, then you will not only hear what is being proposed, but we will also be in a position to hear from you so that we can take these into consideration as we move forward. Let me just say finally, we really want to thank and applaud Canary, who has really been a model of participatory processes, and we thank them for lending their expertise in helping us to drive this framework. So with that, I say again, thank you, and I look forward to the dialogue.
Thank you, Chamberlain. Okay, and as Chamberlain said, that we are in this COVID-19 times, we are celebrating Earth, we are celebrating life, but at the same time, we are reminded of how precious life is. So much that we have taken for granted: a walk outside, a sea bath, the river, the lake shore, an evening out, a hug, and now no-nos. But it is allowing the earth to breathe, and we have to give thanks, at least that we are alive. With so many lives being lost, we have to say thanks for life on the whole, and we will still get to enjoy the earth as we know it, hopefully sooner rather than later, and maybe even have it as a better place. I will now call on our partner, Canary, so Dr. Ms. Nicole Leotard, who is Executive Director of the Caribbean Natural Resources Institute, or Canary as we know it, to make some remarks. Nicole?
Thank you very much, Joan, and I'll echo your greetings and from Chamberlain. Happy Earth Day to everyone from Canary and the Canary family. So Canary Caribbean Natural Resources, many of you know, we're around in the Caribbean working for over 30 years now to promote and facilitate stakeholder participation in the stewardship of natural resources in the Caribbean. We were very much born in St. Lucia, Dominica in the Eastern Caribbean. So as we celebrate Earth Day, we really reflect on our path, our journey, and where we're heading forward as well. I just wanted to share a quick thought that Canary's vision in our strategic plan is that empowered Caribbean people are transforming and integrating social, economic, and ecological systems to achieve equity, well-being, and resilience. This really resonated with me as we're all consumed every day now with addressing the risks by COVID-19 pandemic. It's so terrible everywhere and affecting everyone's lives, and thinking how we can really respond, recover, and build resilience into the future. I think it's critical that we recognize the important role that biodiversity will play, needs to play in helping us with this response and recovery and resilience building. You'll hear in the webinar the important ecosystem services provided by biodiversity, including providing food, water, health, coastal protection from climate change, and so on. You all know it very well, but also it's the basis of key economic sectors and livelihoods, especially many of our poor and vulnerable people. And so really this biodiversity and ecosystems framework and strategic action plans by the OECS is coming at a really critical time where we need to remobilize, refocus, recommit our energy to biodiversity protection, sustainable use, and in some cases restoration. So we are really, really happy to be supporting, collaborating with the OECS Commission on this initiative. Canary is implementing over 15 projects in the Eastern Caribbean now, including research, supporting civil society, government, doing action on the ground in the Eastern Caribbean to protect biodiversity, to sustainably use, to manage it well. And we think that participatory policy development and planning, like what we're doing in this webinar today, is so critical to give stakeholders a voice. This is your chance to set the priorities, to design the approaches of what the OECS will be doing to manage and conserve biodiversity and restore biodiversity over the next years. So we really appreciate your time here. We're looking forward to your comments. I am taking notes as my colleague, Dr. Natalie Boudram, will present. So thank you so much, everyone, being here, and thank you so much to the OECS Commission for allowing us to participate in this exercise with you. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thank you very much, Nicole. And just echoing, as you said, that the value of biodiversity and ecosystems, I'd just like to also indicate that the OECS has 11 member states, okay, which would include English and French-speaking member states, some of them independent and some of them are non-independent states. Also to indicate that the OECS Commission, which is the administrative arm, we have the Environmental Sustainability Cluster, which I mentioned earlier, and we also are looking at our St. George's Declaration, which is the document by which we operate. It is part of the revised treaty of last year, establishing the OECS Economic Union and Protocol. This is our mandate to assist member states, and these are the program areas that we have. So this is the OECS, BSC, as we say. From now, we will call on, or we will have our presentation by Dr. Natalie Boudram. And just to indicate that Natalie she's actually the Senior Technical Officer at the Caribbean Natural Resource Institute, or CANARI. She's currently the manager of the Institute's Biodiversity and Ecosystems team. And she has many years of experience. She's well versed in that, to be the manager of the ecosystems team, having many years of experience as a forest, river, and riparian ecologist. Natalie also has an extensive background in climate resilience, integrated water resources management, environmental health, and environmental education. During her time at CANARI, she has used participatory approaches as was highlighted by Nicole Leotard, to develop a number of national and regional policies and strategies geared towards improved biodiversity and ecosystems management. That would include updating national forest policy and strategy for Grenada, developing the CARICOM Caribbean Biodiversity Strategy, on which this OECS Biodiversity and Ecosystems Management Framework is built on, and also drafting the Food and Agriculture Organization or FAO strategy for building climate resilience in the Caribbean forestry sector. So Natalie is the main author of the OECS Biodiversity and Ecosystems Management Framework and Strategic Action Plans. So we would now hear a presentation from Dr. Natalie Utra.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Joan, so we've been having a little bit of technical issues on my end, so I'd be grateful if someone could confirm that they're hearing me.
Yes,
We're hearing you.
Excellent, great, thanks very much. So I'm going to try and share my screen now. See what's happening. And can you confirm that my screen is available for viewing?
Waiting. It said it started screen sharing, so we'll just wait. Yes, Natalie, it's showing.
Okay, great. Excellent. So we're all set and I will start. So good morning again and happy Earth Day to everyone, and thanks so much for joining us. I note we have over 100 participants, so that's great. And yeah, let's get started. Okay, so we are here today to talk about the OECS Biodiversity and Ecosystems Management Framework and Strategic Action Plans. And you will hear me using the acronym BEF and, well, the SAPs to indicate the Strategic Action Plan. So to introduce myself and my organization, Nicole already would have spoken about Canary, but just very briefly. So hi, I'm Natalie. I work for Canary, and as many of you know, we are a technical nonprofit organization, and we've been around a while. And our geographic focus is the islands of the Caribbean. And Canary's mission is equitable participation and effective collaboration in the management of natural resources, as Nicole and Chamberlain would have indicated. So we are big on these participatory approaches. And also, as Nicole has mentioned, we do work with and through the OECS Commission to execute a number of projects. And this project in particular, the biodiversity strategy, it's for us to also advance our mandate of participatory development of natural resource policies and strategies. So we're doing a lot of work in that regard. And also, as Nicole would have indicated, we are working on a number of projects in the OECS right now. And much of this is facilitated by an MOU that we have with the Commission, which was recently updated and specifically speaks to collaboration, for example, on biodiversity and ecosystems, green-blue economy, and stakeholder engagement. And as you guys know, tomorrow we will be hosting another webinar on green-blue economy. Okay, great. So moving on, why are we here today? So we are here today to highlight and facilitate discussion on key biodiversity and ecosystems issues in the OECS. So I will only be speaking for a short time, and the rest of the time we'll be looking to hear from participants, talk about some key issues, even considering the current situation that we are in right now, the pandemic situation, because I'm sure many of you have read the articles online which have postulated that maybe one of the positives of this situation might be a greater attention to the management of our natural resources. So something to think about. So many of you are familiar with the OECS BEF. We've had a number of documents and online surveys which you all have participated in. But for those who aren't familiar with the initiative, today I'm hoping that we can build some awareness so you all can become familiar with what is being done. So for those people who have actually been participating in the process, various online mechanisms, etc., what we are trying to do now is to update you on the outputs and the project status. And we, in particular, will be sharing this PowerPoint presentation afterwards, and we would be grateful for any sort of feedback, in particular on the strategic action plans. And the reason being that we've gotten significant feedback on the actual strategy, monitoring evaluation mechanism, but we're at the strategic action plan stage, and this is what we specifically need feedback right now on. Okay, so I'm going to just talk a little bit briefly about the characteristics of OECS biodiversity and ecosystem, recognizing that I'm probably preaching to the converted, and I did skim through the registration list, and a lot of people there are experts in their own right in terms of the region's biodiversity and ecosystems. But just to remind you all of a couple things. So for example, the OECS has a rich biodiversity and a high number of endemics. And in particular, the OECS member states are part of the Caribbean biodiversity hotspot, which means that not only is it an area with a high number of endemic species, but that these species are under threat, specifically because of habitat loss, etc. So this underscores how important it is to manage our biodiversity in the OECS region. Also to highlight that, of course, that the OECS economies and general way of life are dependent on the ecosystems and biodiversity. And of course, we are talking tourism, fisheries, agriculture, but beyond that, it's part of our national and regional cultural practices and identities. You know, is it a beach lime, is it a river lime? It's what we use in our small and medium enterprises in terms of the resource that we draw on. So it's inherent and it's key for our lives. And of course, I don't need to be telling you what are some of the key issues, but just a quick reminder, we're dealing with deforestation against a backdrop of the islands have limited land spaces with small mountainous islands in many cases. We're dealing with things like illegal wildlife trade, invasive species, unsustainable resource extraction, pollution. These are all issues that we're facing. And against these pressures, we also have the overarching threat of climate change. So again, I don't need to be reminding you all, but we're dealing with things in terms of changes in temperature, which result in, for example, changes in forest growth and productivity. We're going to have to deal with pests, invasive species, wildfires, etc. We're dealing with, on the marine side, increases in temperature, ocean acidification, coral bleaching. And then, as I mentioned before, climate change essentially intensifies the impacts of negative pressures on the environment. So all of this means we need to take action. So the OECS Biodiversity and Ecosystem Framework is to guide the management of the biodiversity and ecosystems in the OECS region. But what we're hoping to achieve is actual rapid transformational change. So when we started this was around the time that the Global IPBES report had come out last year, which called for this rapid transformational change, recognizing the dire state that our biodiversity and ecosystems are in. So this framework is one way that we're hoping to achieve this rapid transformational change. So the OECS BF, the BF, is a regional framework. So many of the OECS member states, or actually all of them, I'm sure, have their own national strategies. For example, the National Action Plans, the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, under, for example, the Convention on Biodiversity. So yes, we acknowledge that all the member states individually are taking action, but there are a number of issues that are best addressed through a regional lens. And it makes sense, for example, when we need to maximize economies of scale. So because, for example, we know financial and technical resources are limited, a regional approach can try to maximize these resources using a multi-country approach. Also, a number of countries have been struggling to deal with specific issues. So we keep hearing about the countries having difficulty trying to deal with access and benefit sharing issues, for instance, invasive species, things like ecosystem evaluations. These are things that the countries want to advance on, but have limited internal technical capacity. So a regional approach can try to address this limitation. And as Joan would have mentioned, the OECS BEF builds on the draft Caribbean/CARICOM biodiversity strategy. So this was actually developed in 2018, and Canary was the main development partner on this. But the OECS had worked very heavily on this as well. And after the draft was put out, the OECS decided to take it forward as much as possible and try to focus in or zero in on what are the main points that the OECS in particular should be focusing on. So the OECS BEF seeks to do that. And then apart from this, the OECS BEF seeks to respond to directives, including the St. George's Declaration and the OECS Growth and Development Strategy. And a colleague from the OECS has just indicated to me I have that wrong, that it's actually changed right now to the OECS Development Strategy. So apologies for that error. Anyway, moving on. Just want to give an idea of how the OECS BEF was developed. And just to say that it was done in a highly participatory process and also guided by the OECS Commission and the OECS Biodiversity and Ecosystems Management Committee. So the BEMC is actually the biodiversity focal points in each of the OECS member states. And we've been talking very heavily, discussing very heavily all the different issues pertaining to the strategy, using webinars, direct discussions, and very early on, we got guidance from the BEMC through the inputs that they would have made at the 6th meeting of the OECS Council of Ministers. So we're very grateful for their guidance and continued guidance. And as we've been saying, we've been using a strong participatory process. So for example, we've been doing online surveys, online feedback on some of the draft documents. So the first deliverable or output that we actually did was a gap analysis report, which we did ask people to comment on. And it basically identified where were the gaps and therefore priorities for the OECS BEF in the strategy document. So the gap analysis report drew heavily on the draft CARICOM biodiversity strategy, but we also went back a bit to the MBSAPs and NAPs of the various member states to try to figure out again what were the specific issues. So we also looked at different OECS frameworks, different wider Caribbean frameworks, and also international reports and frameworks. We also did conduct an online survey on recent biodiversity initiatives within the OECS. So the idea being there that if there was a particular focus already on a particular theme or area, then the OECS BEF needs to then focus on a different area. So one of the strong points that came out of the online survey, for instance, was that there were a lot of marine initiatives addressing biodiversity and ecosystems, but not a lot of terrestrial initiatives. So one of the things that the OECS BEF tries to do is to actually try to increase the terrestrial focus. So what we did was use the results of the gap analysis report to actually draft the priority themes and actions for the BEF. And what the BEF also included was a monitoring and evaluation mechanism. And then we tried to advance the BEF by developing strategic action plans. So I'm actually going to present on the content now, and I ask for your indulgence. I do have slides with a lot of text and tables, but I'm asking you not to be overwhelmed. I'm just going to point out the key points from a few slides here and there, but the PowerPoint will be shared, and we will be grateful if you go through all the detailed actions and so forth, and then see if you can provide us with some comments. So in case you see some slightly bad grammar in the slides, I just kind of cut a little bit here and there to try to make the tables fit. So apologies for that. And as I mentioned, these are still draft documents and we are still tweaking actions, indicators, targets, and may tweak them even further based on whatever feedback that you all provide. Okay, so what is the vision and goal of the OECS BEF? We're looking at healthy and resilient biodiversity and ecosystems in the OECS, which provide goods and services that support socio-economic development and livelihoods for its people, while conserving the rich natural heritage of the region. So the vision realizes that we are heavily dependent on the biodiversity and ecosystems and that we need to try to conserve. So the goal of the framework is to provide a framework, for a strategic, coordinated, and transformational approach to the management of biodiversity and ecosystems. So based on the gap analysis, the areas that we have focused the BEF on are these following themes. It's protecting, maintaining, and restoring ecosystems as one theme. Another is invasive species management, biosecurity, and biosafety. And then also climate and disaster resilience. And little issue with the slide there, but then fair and equitable access to and sharing of benefits from biodiversity resources. And the last theme that we are focusing on is assessing and integrating biodiversity and ecosystems into national development processes. So we're going to go a little bit more in detail with each of these themes. Okay. All right. And in the BEF, the themes are laid out in terms of objectives, targets, indicators, and actions. But one of the little unusual things we did with the BEF is that the actions were organized according to the four column headings that you all see there. We were looking at implementing existing frameworks. So what is recognized is that there are a number of other initiatives, policies, etc., which speak to biodiversity and ecosystem related actions. So it doesn't make sense for this document to say we're going to come up with a new action, but instead the table or the action would be to try to implement the specific component of the related framework. The BEF also recognizes that there are a number of current and upcoming initiatives which actually already address some aspects of the theme. So the action for this would be trying to see how you can help with those initiatives or use those initiatives to actually implement what is under the BEF. So the idea is we're trying to do all of this, trying to use the popular phrase, not trying to reinvent the wheel, but we're trying to build on what already is there to effect maximum change in as short a time as possible. What the BEF also recognizes is that there's a lot of successful initiatives which have been incorporated which have been executed recently that we can scale up and out. So when we say we want to scale out, it'll be something like if Dominica has made a particular inroad into managing invasive species using a particular technique, can this also be replicated, for example, in St. Vincent or Antigua, any of those countries? And by scaling up, we're talking about, can we take a project and make it into a program? Or can we try to institutionalize the mechanisms within that project, whether it means developing a particular department or a unit within a department to address a particular issue, whether we can put something about the issue in a national policy or legislation. So that's what we mean by scaling up and out. And then recognizing there are some concerns that we need to think about new methods and new approaches to address, and that these must be reflected as well within the BEF. Okay, so I'm going to start by talking about the invasive species management theme. And so, for example, what the objective would be for that is to protect the OECS region against alien species, biosafety, and biosecurity threats. So exactly what we were saying, that there's some things that are already in place. So we can look at these trying to implement these existing frameworks. So there is, for example, a regional action plan that's already there that this framework could seek to push forward. Further, we're looking at things like strengthening national legislation and regulations. And there is a particular concern surrounding living modified organisms. So we're going to see how we can evaluate the issue and scale up whatever initiatives that are already in place to try to address. So some of you, we all, I think, are familiar with IAS, invasive alien species, but just definitions for biosafety and biosecurity, in case you're not as familiar with those terms. Okay, so going back to sort of like the table that shows the different actions. And again, remember I said I'm not going to go through every single action under every single theme. To point out a couple things that in purple, just a couple more interesting points. So we know, for example, in terms of linking up with current or recent initiatives, we have existing platforms and information sharing platforms such as the Caribbean Invasive Alien Species Network. So these are mechanisms that we can use to advance the BEF. And then I already spoke about scaling out experiences. So Dominica, under the OECS GCCA project, has had a fair amount of success in addressing lemongrass, which is a major invasive species in many of the member states. So why can't we take some of those experiences and apply them to member states like Antigua and St. Vincent, which are also struggling with this issue? So moving on to fair and equitable access to and sharing of benefits from biodiversity resources. So the goal there, the objective is to equip Caribbean stakeholders with the capacity, entry points, and mechanisms for participatory management of biodiversity and ecosystems while protecting their rights and benefits. And obviously you all would know this is all relevant to the Nagoya Protocol. And then one of the key targets is to help the ratification of the Nagoya Protocol amongst OECS member states. And one of the key targets, for instance, is to develop a regional access and benefit sharing model policy and guidelines, because this is something that the member states have been struggling with. So again, in terms of the actions, we can build on things that are already in place. So there was a recent GEF project to advance the Nagoya Protocol. So one of the key things we need to do is look at that, see what was done, what we can do to build on what was already achieved. Okay, so we do have 3 remaining themes, which is the protecting, restoring ecosystems, climate, and assessing and integrating into national development processes. But just to flag that these were actually developed into strategic action plans. The time and resources didn't allow for strategic action plans for all the themes. So I'm actually going to be talking about these themes, but not as how they appear in the biodiversity and ecosystems framework, but under the slightly different format of the strategic action plan, recognizing that all the actions are the same and they're just organized a little bit differently. And specifically within the strategic action plans, we of course have the same objectives, targets, indicators, but what we've done is we've pulled the actions from the different, whether it's implementing existing framework or using new approaches, but molding them now into actions that we would want to do in the short term and of course in the long term, to just try to prioritize how we move forward. So in terms of that as well, we've also gone ahead and flagged the lead agency for these actions and highlighted a few potential implementing partners. And of course, suggestions for other implementing partners are welcome. And of course, the main lead agency in most cases is the OECS Commission. Okay, so starting with protecting, maintaining, and restoring ecosystems. So just to flag that ecosystem restoration is a very big deal right now, in that because of the level of degradation of ecosystems across the region, there's a strong emphasis on restoration. So this picture actually was from a regional workshop early this year in St. Lucia, which many of our OECS colleagues participated in. And the site is actually around Fonseca, the Edmond Forest Reserve in St. Lucia, where we were looking at the different strategies that the Forestry Department in St. Lucia was using to try to restore the areas that were affected by landslides and so forth. And what is interesting about this site in particular is that in addition to native species, because of the need to sustain livelihoods, etc., they actually executed the restoration activity using a number of agricultural and agroforest species. So that was a good experience and a good sharing point for restoration techniques, which will become much more important, or sorry, are currently very important for our ecosystems. So in terms of the objective, we're looking to secure goods and services by protecting, maintaining, or restoring key ecosystems. And an aspect there is because it's a regional document, we're emphasizing transboundary landscapes and seascapes, more seascapes, of course, for the OECS region. So some of the key targets, we're looking at biodiversity and ecosystem assessments, but to point out 1.3, land use planning, fiscal measures, and other tools used to support the management of terrestrial biodiversity and ecosystems. So this supports what I was saying before, that what came out of the gap analysis is that while we've been getting a fair amount of attention directed to marine resources, we do need to focus a bit more on terrestrial resources. And of course, some key indicators there, percentage cover, forested areas, etc., that typical indicators that you would use. A key issue highlighted in purple for managing biodiversity and ecosystems, protecting, maintaining, and restoring ecosystems is actually species inventories and monitoring. You know, we hear this all the time. We speak to our forestry colleagues. We don't have inventory data, and this is a key issue that really needs to be advanced. My colleague Nicole, maybe in the discussion, can speak a little bit more about this, but an emerging issue is that we need to build capacity of OECS member states to engage in regional actions for the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity in international waters adjacent to the OECS. So we've been doing some work on that, but this BBNJ issue is a critical issue for the region and one we need to become familiar with and help manage as we go forward. So in terms of long-term actions, as I mentioned before, if you look at 1.26, looking at developing, sourcing, financing, and executed regional initiatives for the management of transboundary ecosystems. So we know we have that issue that we have migration of species, for example, from one country to another. We have issues of shared resources, for example, shared marine spaces. So how do we deal with this? And the BEF is the mechanism to look at that because it is a regional initiative. Looking at climate and disaster resilience. So of course, we're looking to build the resilience of the region's biodiversity to climate change and natural hazards. And a key aspect and a key need is basically information. That we need a downscale model information. We need to know what's specifically going on in the Caribbean region so that we can help try to treat these issues. And one of the things that we would like to see is both the climate-related framework speaking to biodiversity and the biodiversity framework speaking to climate change. So that's something that we need to address. In this one here, in terms of short-term actions, we are focusing now, I'm focusing on 1.1.4, which is developing a regional research agenda on the impacts of climate change on biodiversity. So this actually wasn't directly part of the OECS BEF, but I pulled together some info from an FAO climate resilience strategy. And this is what, for example, our scientists at UE and stuff are saying that we need to get research into. So they are talking about looking at downscaling of climate models to map specific forest ecosystem and site impacts. So apologies, this is forestry specific. We need to look at risk ecosystems, for example, cloud forest, dry forest. We need to look at how climate change is affecting small range and endemic species, species distribution, animal behavior. So just to give you a flavor of what these specific research needs are, with regards to one specific ecosystem type, that we need to include as we move forward to try to manage these resources. Okay, just some other aspects here. We would want, for example, our protected area management plans to be more climate resilient. Couple long-term actions. It's a lot about knowledge sharing, capacity building, and we're looking at restoration, for example, of degraded ecosystems to also build resilience. So for me, restoration is a very strong theme across this entire initiative. So moving on to assessing and integrating biodiversity and ecosystems into national development processes. And the goal, the objective is to assess and integrate biodiversity and ecosystems information into national development processes. There you go. And one of the things that we wanted to highlight was ecosystem evaluation. And this is a critical need across many of the member states where there's a lack of capacity to execute these, but we needed to be able to convince our decision makers to pay attention to the value of biodiversity. So one of the projects that we wanted to highlight is that Grenada is actually the first small island developing state and the first Caribbean country to actually implement a national ecosystem assessment process. And we're very familiar with it because Canary is actually the executing partner. And there actually may be scope for other countries to replicate what is currently being done in Grenada. We're still in the very early stages of it, but it's something that we can look at and look at potentially replicating across the other countries. Some further short-term actions. So 1.3.3, looking at mechanisms, sustainable financial mechanisms. And my colleague Nicole is much more familiar with these, and she had added these into the strategy. But some of the things we can talk about in terms of financial mechanisms, including looking at blue bonds, debt for nature swaps, crowdsourcing, diaspora funding, etc. So the idea being we need to look at a range of mechanisms to try to find the funding that we need for our biodiversity and ecosystems protection. One of the other short-term actions I wanted to flag is that we need to be disseminating data and knowledge to encourage our decision makers to take into account the value of biodiversity within policies, plans, and budgets. And a good mechanism for that is, of course, the comms. I think the next one this year will be a virtual comms, but I believe the strategy will be presented here, and it would be great if we could focus on the value ecosystem valuation to try to encourage our decision makers to think a little bit more along those lines. Couple other long-term actions. So many of the long-term actions speak to the actual implementation based on whatever research, etc., that was collated in the short-term actions. So we're looking to implement some of the financing tools, etc., in the long term. So we actually don't have too many more slides. So just to say, of course, that the OECS BF includes an implementation framework and a monitoring and evaluation mechanism. And the implementation framework focuses on a couple key areas: coordination, information knowledge sharing, capacity building, partnerships and stakeholder engagement, resource mobilization, and of course, monitoring. Of course, these are the usual categories that you would normally have within any sort of strategy or policy. So in terms of coordination, some key targets is effective implementation, focusing heavily on support and guidance from the BEMC. And so an indicative action, I'm just highlighting one or two here and there, is that we would want to make sure that there's regular meetings of the OECS BEMC to be able to put this input into the execution of the BEF. We've spoken a lot. If you go back to the tables, there's a lot of reference to using or developing or supporting existing online sharing platforms. And one of the things is, of course, we want to emphasize local and traditional knowledge. In terms of capacity building, we may need to have a targeted strategy for capacity building. But as we all know, across all member states, we're dealing with very low staff complements in many of our environmental departments or forestry departments, fisheries, etc. So one of the actions that I kind of would like to see is how we try to engage and build the capacity of communities, civil society organizations, CSOs, and even retirees and volunteers. So yes, we do have low staff complements and various issues within our government departments, but let's try and see what other human resources out there that may be able to assist and may be willing to assist. Partnerships, of course, and stakeholder engagement. So we're looking to strengthen the partnerships to be able to support the implementation of the BEF. Resource mobilization, of course, is a key issue. And within the framework, of course, we do have a very specific monitoring and evaluation mechanism. So we're basically at the end, and just want to then therefore give you a current status of where we're at. The framework itself is basically finished. So we've gone through several rounds of feedback, but if you see any issues within the PowerPoint that's a burning issue that you're not comfortable with, please let us know. I mean, of course, we can still tweak. I've put in a lot of tables there from the SAPs. So that in particular, we would be grateful for feedback on. So as I said, the PowerPoint will be shared, and you know, if you can send us emails, etc. on it, we would be grateful. The project is actually scheduled for completion in April at the end of this month. So we do need comments quickly, please. And hopefully, as far as I know, and Joan can speak to this, I think we are trying to present the framework, the finished framework and strategic action plans at the next Council of Ministers on Environment. So before I close, just to say a big thanks to the OECS for the opportunity to partner on this initiatives. And of course, Joan and Norma in particular have been really great. Lots of phone calls, etc. Thank you very much, ladies. Thanks to the OECS BEMC for your feedback. And we are always grateful that people take the time to actually respond to our surveys and call for comments, etc. So thank you very much, folks. So that's it for me. You know, please contact me if you need to find out anything specific, but Joan will also speak about how we're sharing the PowerPoint and so forth. So thank you very much. Joan, I believe over to you now.
Okay, thank you, Natalie, for this interesting presentation. We will move right into the panel discussion. So as was indicated before, we have a live panelist, and you may have, well, sorry, when I say live panel, we have a group of persons that who will be assisting in answering questions as well as engaging in discussion. There are already a few questions in the question and answer chat. Some of us have been responded to them, but there are some that we believe should be answered live or verbally. So Cornelius Isaac, who is a technical specialist at the Environmental Sustainability Cluster at the OECS Commission, will be our moderator, and the panelists include our presenter. So I will hand over to Cornelius right now.
Okay, Joan, good morning to all. Well, our panelists are Natalie, who there's no need to introduce her again, Susanna Scott, and Norma Cherry-Favre, both of whom are technical people and coordinators or program officers at the OECS Sustainable Environmental Cluster. Apart from Natalie, as I said, I think the first point of departure would be for Susanna and Norma to briefly introduce themselves, and we will take it from there. Can we start with Susanna?
Good morning to all. Cornelius, I noticed you refrain from using my full name. The both of it is very easy to pronounce, so I'm not sure why. But my background is in marine science. I was a fisheries biologist for many years, and I also have a background in integrated coastal zone management. So I will be addressing comments from that perspective. I'm not sure, Cornelius, if you want me to give my views now, or if you want me, Norma, to introduce herself first before I speak more fully.
Yes, let Norma introduce herself.
Okay, thanks, Cornelius. Good morning, everyone. Norma Cherry Favre. I am a program officer with the OECS Environmental Sustainability Cluster. My background is in economics and natural resource and environmental management. I would just like to wish everyone a happy Earth Day today, even though we're all indoors. But you will hear a little bit more from me later. Thanks much.
Okay, thank you, Susanna and Norma. And now we will have just a brief summary of your take on the subject matter. We can start with Susanna again.
Yeah. Good morning again. Thank you, Natalie. That was an excellent presentation. I must say it was very comprehensive. I just have a couple of points I'd like to make. One, I'd like to bring to the attention some work that is being done under the OECS's Caribbean Regional Oceanscape project, and that is the preparation of a regional marine spatial planning framework. That framework will speak to guidelines and strategies for cooperation across boundaries and try to facilitate transnational actions. And I know that you raised the issue of invasive species, and I believe it will take transnational actions to really address things like lionfish and other marine type invasive species, including things like sargassum. Also, in terms of the strategy, you did mention that there would be some need for cross-border biodiversity protection strategies as well. And I think that marine spatial planning framework can assist in addressing that. That will be prepared and available by 2021, mid-2021, under what I call the CROP project, the Caribbean Regional Oceanscape project. Another issue I wanted to bring out, and you did ask if we had any burning issues, and this is my burning issue. It's one on pollution. I think pollution is such a pervasive and critical issue that it really needs to be brought to the fore in this strategy. I would actually like to see it at the theme level, something to do with pollution reduction. And I say this again, referring to the marine resources, especially things like habitats such as coral reefs. There are quite a few efforts to restore coral reefs, to establish coral nurseries, etc. But we have to note that the water quality in the region may not be in the best, like at this point in time, to support some of these activities. And if we are to be fruitful in addressing some of these activities through restoration of coral reefs in particular, we really need to address issues of water quality. I think that it is something that really needs to go high up in the agenda. And when we also look at things like the impacts on the food chain in terms of pollutants that could get into the food chain and affect human health, etc. Pollution is something that needs to be really brought to the fore. I kind of glanced at the strategy and note some actions relate to it, but again, as I said, I think it needs to come higher up in the strategy, at least under the thematic level. Another point I wanted to bring up is someone did ask, what is the OECS doing in terms of cooperation among projects, etc. I spoke to the Regional Marine Spatial Planning Framework, but just to say most of our projects involve cooperation and involve regional activities, as Natalie pointed out, regional actions as well as national actions. And on the issue of pollution, again, to just bring to the attention of the audience that the OECS is currently addressing currently implementing a project called Building Resilience in the OECS through the reduction in marine litter. And the focus of this project is really to address waste management issues. So it's really looking at a lot of land-based sources of marine pollution and addressing these. And I think it's critical that this strategy looks at actions at that level, and not just focus at the species or the ecosystem level, but also at the environment level, the pollution, the medium level, and to be able to really address some of the issues affecting biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. Norma, can you make some brief general remarks? And then we will go to Natalie to add some more or respond to what Susanna and Norma would have said. So Norma, you have the...
Thanks much, Cornelius. Thanks, Natalie, for your presentation. And also thanks to Susanna for her comments. I just want to add the work on the biodiversity and ecosystems management framework is timely, and I note we have participants from all around the globe on this webinar. And it is timely because most of us would know that the UN has declared the 2021 to 2030, the UN decade on ecosystems restoration. And I think this is very, very important in light of what we're doing here, because it will help, while it provides the framework for a very strategic and coordinated approach to how we manage our biodiversity in the region. Some of this work is critical. One thing I want to add here is that the OECS has some upcoming projects, one of which is an EU-funded project. It's a support program to ACP SIDS and coastal countries. And the focus of this project is biological diversity, climate change adaptation, and also as an aid to the environment. Now, this project is expected to contribute to the sustainable development of ACP SIDS and coastal countries by supporting and improving the management and sustainable use of marine and coastal resources. Now, the OECS Commission will be implementing results 1 and 2 of this project in the Caribbean region, and result 1 focuses on capacity building to help strengthen the effective management of our marine and coastal resources. And result 2 will be focused more on the ground actions within the member states. Now, I also wanted to add, we spoke about the COVID-19, and I just had a thought, and it would be interesting just to hear maybe from 1 or 2 persons. In the islands, for us, at least in St. Lucia, what we have seen with the ongoing limited commerce and shutdowns, a need to produce and buy local fruits and vegetables. And I was just thinking, I think this presents an opportunity for us to really focus on food security, because we tend to forget the important role that biodiversity plays in food security. It's often sort of like the unseen link between the two. And I think this biodiversity and ecosystems management framework can help in that regard and help us focus on targeted initiatives and liaising with our partners, which we have started doing, to ensure that the work that we're doing in the OECS and the funding that we receive are prioritized and targeted to ensure maximum results on the ground in our member states. So that's it from me now. Thanks much, Cornelius.
Okay, thank you, Norma. Natalie, can you make a couple more remarks to tie in, the varied points that were raised by Susanna, Norma? And I also mentioned that you can add some salient points that perhaps you didn't bring out during your presentation. Natalie?
Thanks, Cornelius. So starting with Susanna's comments. So thanks very much for highlighting the marine spatial planning initiatives. And as you would have seen in the BEF, we are focusing on linking two existing initiatives that are in place. So of course, we'll be using the marine spatial planning work that you're doing to advance the BEF. So noted, and thanks for sharing on that. With regards to the pollution factor, thank you. So Joan and I actually had Joan had actually chatted with me, and I did increase a little bit more of the text and reference to the pollution aspect, but I hear you that you think it should be greater emphasized, and not a problem. We will happily adjust in discussions with Joan and Norma how best to bring about that emphasis. So well received, and definitely we will do. Norma, thanks for sharing the information that you did. And like you, I agree, we do need to be thinking more about local production. But a key issue is, of course, we need to do it in a way that, yes, we can increase local production because we do need to be able to feed ourselves. I mean, COVID-19 has underscored that. But one of the concerns for me is we have to make sure it's done in as sustainable a manner as possible. So that's something we need to think about. On one hand, yes, food security, but how do we do it as sustainable and as whatever way that we can to make sure that we don't in turn compromise our biodiversity and ecosystems. Thanks, Cornelius. That's my feedback for now.
Okay, thank you. And we have a couple of questions from the audience. I will just read through them one by one, and you all are free to decide who should respond to it, Natalie, Susanna, or Norma. The first one is from Enrique, and it says, the Marine Biodiversity Observation Network, pole to pole of the Americas, would greatly benefit from working with OECS in capacity building for biodiversity monitoring. I think Joan, you are also free to add or to respond to any of the questions.
Cornelius, yes, sorry, Susanna. I did respond to that. I was just not sure how to move it into the answered section. I responded to it indicating that, yes, this would be a good opportunity to discuss partnering and collaboration, and that Enrique could send us an email with some further information. He sent us a web link, which we will take a look at it as well and have future discussions on collaborating in this respect.
Okay, great, thank you. And I guess in the webinars report, we could also add that link. We could share that link with the audience. So thank you, Enrique. Ricky Alexander has a question or a comment. It states, on the issue of assessing and integrating biodiversity and ecosystems into national development outcomes, the screen keeps moving. It is my humble view that there is a critical need to looking at housing building models in the region with respect to large acreage of lands which is being converted to housing, which were previous lands in agriculture, which was lost due to the decrease in banana production. I guess he's referring to the modes of development that we have, the sprawl, which is quite dominant within the small islands. Anybody want to respond?
Cornelia, I could perhaps respond, if okay with Norma and Susanna.
Yes,
Okay.
Natalie, please go ahead.
So I hear you. Your point is very well noted, and it is that we did in fact at some point have our agricultural lands not being used, and that actually increased biodiversity when we started having reestablishment of forests and so forth. But yes, across the member states, the issue of housing is happening, and that is now converting the agricultural land that was recovering back into urban development. So we acknowledge your point. We do have some actions within the OECS BDF that speak directly to land use planning. So it is being addressed. I'm not sure that I have the quick, what is the answer to this problem, but we do recognize that it is an issue and it's something that we are trying to address within the BDF.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you. Next question from Karen Gill. The CBF has focused and supported national conservation trust funds in the region and the OECS. Please share your thinking on where the sustainable finance mechanisms and conservation financing programs fit within the framework. Have the trust funds been included in the conversations?
so I think
Anyone?
me again. Yes, of course, do note the conservation trust funds, and they are referenced in the wider document. My apologies if it didn't come out that much in the presentation, but yes, of course, we do recognize and acknowledge that that is another mechanism for use for the execution of the BDF. Thanks for sharing that.
Cornelius, just from me also, just to add what Natalie said, in our discussions internally, we have spoken about the National Conservation Trust Funds because we recognize that they would be a very good partner, especially when we're undertaking, you know, the work on the ground in the countries, in building capacity of communities, etc.
Thank you, Norma. On the next question from DF, under the banner of linking with current and upcoming initiatives, is the focus here only Caribbean initiatives, or are global initiatives also being identified? Specifically, will there be a concerted regional effort to join the cataloging efforts of initiatives that use AI/machine learning? Anyone? Or can we defer that question?
So Natalie here, I'm not so familiar with the AI type learning, but yes, of course, the focus is a bit more on the Caribbean initiatives. But for example, we recently participated, as in a number of OECS member states are looking at restoration initiatives as part of maybe other global work that is being done. So where relevant, of course. Not sure about the AI aspect. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that.
Yes, Cornelius, I was wondering what the AI actually stood for. Is this the artificial intelligence? What does it stand for? And that would depend. That would kind of have me answer differently depending on what it stands for.
Okay.
Or maybe I should just make my intervention because I realize it's speaking about learning. Just to note, okay. There is an activity under the Caribbean Regional Oceanscape Project that is looking to establish a virtual learning platform called Think Blue. It's been piloted under this project, under the CROP project, and we will be putting a number of e-learning tools on that platform, including webinars, ebooks. There's a children's game. We've actually developed a non-tech game and an edutech game. Both will be available on that platform. It's sort of a virtual learning campus that is being established to highlight issues related to the oceans in the OECS to begin with as a pilot, and then will be broadened to the region and then ultimately globally.
Okay, there's a question from Yves Renard, which states that a press release from IUCN and the Museum Naturel in France, Historique, anyway, it's in French, Naturel in France, today raised an alarm about the status of biodiversity in Martinique, with an extremely high percentage of native species on the IUCN Red List. Can we assume that the situation is not much better in Guadeloupe? Both are associate members of the OECS, and taken together, they have a large proportion of the sub-region's biodiversity and more than half of its human population. To what extent are these territories part of and served by the OECS framework? And does the Commission feel, that is the OECS Commission, does it feel that it has the capacity to influence and support more effective biodiversity management in these territories? How is the framework dealing with transboundary issues and regional ecosystem management, biodiversity and biosecurity issues linked to these territories? Natalie, you want to have a go at that?
I think that's more for my OECS colleagues to speak to.
Okay, I just wanted to say one thing on that. I won't answer the question in full, but I'll just remind that my comment on the regional marine spatial framework that is being prepared was actually to answer that question in part, to indicate that this framework will provide us with some guidelines and strategies for that type of cooperation with associate member states. So I'm not sure if maybe Chamberlain wants to jump in. I know he's not a panelist, but maybe he might be in a better position to answer.
Okay, thank you, Susanna and Yves. So we recognize the issue that Martinique and Guadeloupe are associated members, and they form half of the population, more or less. So what we've been doing is we have been working with them collaboratively. We have also been supporting them. For example, Martinique has been pursuing World Heritage inscription status, and the OECS has supported both in terms of advice, guidance. At least 3 of our countries have had similar experience in pursuit of World Heritage inscription. So we have shared our advice with them, we have shared recommendations, experiences, and that has been done through the OECS. We've also been engaged in seminars and other public awareness events that they have hosted. So we have provided input, we have been at these. Also to mention that in the framework, there is strategic actions aimed at one, in terms of having a network of World Heritage sites and looking at it as a transboundary initiative, both to more effectively manage the site. So we would share experiences, but as well, hopefully look at it as a marketing tool for the countries as well as a management tool. So all the countries that have World Heritage status or are in the process or thinking of pursuing World Heritage status, we would have this network. This would not only allow for the marketing, but it's also looking at the biodiversity, how we can manage and how we can increase our capacity to manage our endemic species, our threatened species, through a transboundary initiative. So this is very important as well in terms of biosecurity, because recognizing that maybe Martinique and Guadeloupe and that also goes on to some of the other English-speaking overseas territories, they are not independent member states. So under multilateral conventions, they find themselves subsumed under the mother countries. But we also have the issue that this does not filter down to them in the Caribbean. So they see more synergies. We have the similar concerns, the similar challenges in the Caribbean. And as such, we are using the OECS network to address these challenges, whether it is at the Council of Ministers, whether it is at the authority. to see if we can, how we can better support. In terms of the capacity, we again, in country, we also, I should say in the OECS, the exchange of information is important because they also have tools and experiences and, should I say, support that they can provide other member states to build capacity of member states in terms of all of us trying to push forward on the same, at the same level, on the same page. They are more advanced in some areas and we are learning from them. That is, the other member states are learning from them and their experiences. At the same time, they are also learning. So it's a good sharing of information, a good exchange of information, and we are hoping to consolidate and strengthen that sort of collaboration within the region.
Okay, Joan, thank you very much for that explanation. We are quickly running out of time, so we have a few minutes to answer a couple of questions. There is one from Stephen Mendez, which says, totally agree with the comment of balancing food security without compromising biodiversity resources. This comes into sharp focus on small islands. There is a pressure to go back to the mountains to farm. However, if there is resistance to innovative farming, it could possibly impact biodiversity and water resources. What outreach mechanisms have been made available to support innovative farming practices, to raise awareness of biodiversity assets, and setting a balance between the two issues? Any volunteers?
Okay, Cornelius, I will start with that one. What maybe I should have said earlier when I made the point, as the gentleman included, is this presents an opportunity for us to really sensitize and re-emphasize the climate smart and environmentally friendly cultivation and farming techniques. I know our agriculture unit within the OECS is doing some work in terms of the outreach. I am not sure specifically, but I know in terms of some of the impacts of that the COVID-19 is having on the implementation of some of our projects, there has been the discussion around undertaking or prioritizing some of the initiatives that will focus or have a more direct impact on livelihoods within the member states, and the agriculture and food security comes into there. And within that whole framework, we will ensure and emphasize those environmentally friendly farming practices and techniques are adhered to.
Okay, thank you, Norma. Ron Corner has a question. Kind of reinforcing what Norma said. He said, I fully endorse what Norma said with regards to this being an opportune time for us to look at food security and increase agriculture. Do you believe that this will also cause increased biodiversity loss, especially for land use within smaller islands?
Yeah, well, again, that is dependent, on how we manage and how we manage the situation. Again, we need to see this as an opportunity to re-emphasize and ensure that the farming practices that persons undertake do not further contribute to biodiversity loss within the countries.
Okay, thank you.
Cornelius, to chime in after Norma, a key issue in my mind is, for example, the use of pesticides and then the impact of that on, for example, pollinators. So flagging that this is a very critical issue, and I'm glad to see that a number of our participants are bringing it up. So it is a pollution issue as well, and something we need to think about. Thanks.
Natalie, can you also respond to the question by Yves Regis, which says, how are we using biodiversity to respond to needs assessed in the regional food chain? I think you started responding to that. Perhaps you can expand a little. And the second part of his question is, can participatory approaches increase ownership, resilience, and well-being of population?
So, of course, the answer to the first is that protection will support our food chain in terms of, for example, our genetic resources, specifically in terms of our pollinators, for instance. So if we ensure that there's habitat for bees, if we ensure that there's species that they can feed on and so forth, yes, of course, that translates to better food security. We're also looking at different practices, for example, agroforestry, and recognizing that something like that can help with land stabilization and soil erosion. So the answer to that, of course, is yes. Protecting the biodiversity will engender more sustainable farming practices. And I have even been, of course, touch on things like water security, that our forests or watersheds provide that resource for farmers to operate on. Sorry, the second question, can you repeat that, please?
Okay, I would love to, but I think, Nicole, Natalie, we have run out of time.
Okay.
Right, we like 5 minutes, behind. So, but what I could say is that that everything that we have done here, the entire webinar, even the questions that were not posed, right? Responses to these questions will be shared with everybody. The presentations will be shared. So be assured that, there will be some response to your questions, and that will be circulated to everyone who have participated in this webinar. Now, in summary, I want to thank the panelists for their contributions to the discussions. It was quite interesting, and I think most of the main areas, the main concerns that we have with regards to biodiversity and ecosystem conservation were addressed in some fashion. The issue of sustainable development, and it's linked to the subject area, the loss and degradation of ecosystems, was kind of addressed. We looked at a lot of the challenges that we are faced with, and also our hopes for conservation and restoration of our ecosystems, and I am sure this is not the end of that conversation. We are always pushing to get the issue of ecosystem and biodiversity on the front burner. So rest assured that, the OECS Commission will keep trying its utmost best to push this agenda forward. I would like to thank all participants for their questions. And at this point, I think I should turn over to Joan.
Thank you very much, Cornelius, our moderator. Thank you very much, panelists, for the interesting discussion. We actually have a few questions that were unanswered, but as Cornelius said, we will be trying our best to either put them on, post them, or answer them as best as we can on the website. I also want to inform that there's a webinar questionnaire in terms of an evaluation So we invite you to provide feedback on this webinar to assist us in maintaining and improving the quality and relevance of our work. If you go to your screen, you will see a thing that says poll questions at the bottom of the screen, I believe. So if you go to that, you will see the evaluation. It will take less than 5 minutes to respond. So as we are closing out, you can also take a look. Also to note that the PowerPoint presentation and the executive summary of the biodiversity and ecosystems framework and action plans will be available on the websites, both OECS and Canary, as these are the website links, oecs.org and canary.org. So we invite you, if you all go to these, to also share any feedback, thoughts, or comments you may have on the documents. And we will look to see, somebody asked a question in terms of the recording. We will look to see if we can put the recording of the webinar. We'll work with our IT to see if that would be possible. So it will be available for those who may have missed it or missed parts of it. We will do our best to see if we can post it on the site. Also to inform in terms of the next steps, and some of the questions had, how would COVID-19 impact or inform the approach for the biodiversity and ecosystems management framework as the strategic action plans. It will have some impact, and also challenges like that also may have us to go back and review some of the strategic actions so that in future, some of these challenges, and I noted a lot of it dealt with food security, the supply chain, and that was in the questions that are yet to be answered, but I noticed there was that, as well as research priorities and other even strategic actions, the prioritizing of strategic actions. Do some of these have to come up into, should I say, immediate term? Do we have to move it to an urgent list? So all of these questions we will look at between Canary and OECS and see how we can tweak, how we can adapt the biodiversity and ecosystems management framework, especially the strategic action plans, to respond to challenges like this that may come up, especially the impact that such may have on our natural resources, because although now Mother Earth might be breathing because there might be less pollution, but at the same time, we have to ensure that the return to normalcy, and that return, that our natural resources are not even more rapidly depleted or degraded by unsustainable practices. We have to make every day Earth Day. So we need to take a look at that. We need to see how we can ease back to normalcy without going to, making it worse for our Earth, for our biological resources. I would now like to ask, we've come to the end of our webinar, so I would like to ask Chamberlain and Nicole to make a few closing remarks, please, and just to thank everybody.
Okay, thanks, Joan. Well, just again to thank everyone for your attendance, your attention, and your participation. To remind you that we have the second webinar tomorrow. We'll focus on green-blue economy. That should also be very interesting and engaging. To alert you that we are in the process of updating the St. George's Declaration, which is the foundation for our work in the Eastern Caribbean, and the outcome of this, or the pillars of this current strategy will be reflected in the new St. George's Declaration. We thank you for all of you member states who are on, as well as our development partners and general interested persons. And we ask you to do your part, continue to do your part in promoting and in advancing the work of conserving and sustainably using our natural resources. So thank you so much and have a wonderful day. I hand over to Nicole.
Chamberlain, I have no additional comments, just to thank everyone for participating. Natalie for her excellent work on this, and the OECS Commission for its leadership and vision. And I think this is even more critical than ever, and we are very happy to be collaborating on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. And so just to end with a special thanks to our IT support unit, Anya and Stefan, as well as our communications unit, our panelists, very well, and just to be thankful, our presenter, Natalie, excellent work. Again, the backup team, because we also had a set of persons who were responding to some of the questions in written responses. So some of y'all may see, or y'all may not have heard a verbal answer to your question, but there is a written response. So we hope that is acceptable. Thank you all for your feedback, the checks, the chats, the comments, and especially the attendees. We thank you very much for attending, and we hope that you continue to stay safe, that you continue to enjoy and observe Earth Day, even though it's through our windows, in some form in our balconies. But at the end of the day, staying safe is one of the major things, so that we continue the work that we are doing. So thank you very much, and see you tomorrow, same time. Bye.